Smith here, lead animator at Volition, and I'm talking to Young Vo, who is lead animator at Sparky Pants. And give him a little bit of history about some other games and stuff you've worked on as well.
I worked on ZeniMax Online, where I met Mike. Before that, worked on Reckoning. Before that, I worked on Red Dead Midnight Club 3. And also worked on Stuart Little for a little bit also.
Yeah.
The film.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now what inspired you specifically to get into animation?
All right, here's a long story. I always loved animation, but it was one of those things where I never thought about like I could make money doing, right? So I didn't know I could do that. So I kind of got lost a little bit in terms of like what I wanted to do, and then I met my wife. She told me basically, you should go to art school. You're actually pretty good. And so I go, well, what the heck? And I basically applied to the best art schools I can find. And luckily I got into CalArts. And what really turned me on to animation is going to sound silly, but the first time I did the bouncing ball, it was seeing something move that I've created that really kind of triggered the whole idea, like, wow, this is amazing. And then the more I studied, the more I realized that, yeah, I can make a living doing this, seeing how, this teachers talking about, with the films and all stuff that they've done. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. What do you hope to accomplish with the work that you create?
It's funny, animation in games is like one of those things where like if you do it right, most people won't notice, but if you do something amazing, then they're like, oh wow, that's really great. But if you do something inspiring, it's one of those things where like people kind of remember when they're like 10 years after they played your game. And hopefully my goal, I guess, is to make something that's inspiring. Like,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What do you think? What's a piece of game animation then that's done that for you? Something that's stuck with you?
It's an old school game. It's called Ico. I don't know if you guys played it. It's on PlayStation 2. That game, the animation was amazing. Like, it was the first time I actually played a game where I'm actually really invested in the characters to the point where I'm like, oh my god, I gotta keep this girl alive,
Yeah.
And like just the interaction between those two characters that really like kind of like inspired me to make work that had a connection with like the player. Like I think that's one of my goals. I think. Yeah.
That's awesome. So now what are you working on right now? What are you guys making at Sparky Pants?
We're making Drop Zone. Awesome game. It's a RTS / MOBA hybrid. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Super fun.
Go into some like what would be like some of the animation work that you do on that?
Actually, it's my first time doing like a top-down view game, and one of the things I've learned actually is basically you really have to animate from that camera angle. Like you can't really animate like how I normally would, like with a third person. So it was one of those learning curves for me where basically I had to make things read from a certain angle. I would have to actually cheat a lot too. Like a perfect example, we have a lot of gear on our rigs, and what I have to do is like basically exaggerate some of the movements just so it can read. Because like sometimes we have things that kind of go forward, but from the camera angle you kind of tilt it forward, tilt it up, so that basically when you fire, you're not really firing straight at the character, or at the enemy. You're kind of firing up. So basically, it allows the player to actually see the attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a learning curve, but like it was super fun to do though.
That's awesome. One of the games you worked on that I always kind of look back to and remember fondly is Reckoning. Like the stuff that you guys did there, I think with the creatures and the character. I mean, it was, the visual aesthetic I thought was really interesting. What's maybe either like an interesting challenge or kind of a favorite story you had from working on Reckoning and Amalar?
I think for me, like the biggest thing that I learned was working together as a team. Well, I think one of the cool or special things about Reckoning or working on that game was basically we formed a group called the Combat Pit. Because at the time we were trying to develop the combat to a point where it was like central to our game, and we were trying to get it to a point where it was something that people would gravitate towards, but we didn't really had the right formula for it until we kind of like, you know what, let's get the designers and the animators sitting together, and basically that was and effects artist Ken Whitman. So basically we all kind of got them all together in one room, and basically that way we can kind of work off of each other, and basically kind of feed off of like how, not only from design but from animation, how do we make the combat amazing. And we came up with a lot of great ideas, and basically we were able to just like prototype, experiment, and then I think from what we did, it was successful because like we got great feedback on the combat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't say enough that working with designers and animators together is truly a magic sauce.
Yeah. No. It's one of those, when we work together, you talking about that process and stuff is something that I know has inspired me on Volition, on Agents of Mayhem, and kind of how I try to approach characters and working with designers. And it's something that's like stuck with me of seeing the enthusiasm even, a couple years on of remembering that process and remembering those characters fondly, and that twinkle in your eye every time that came up. I could see that, and I remember that, and I was like, that's important when you find somebody that, making games is hard, and everyone has good stories about making a game, and then everyone's got those stories that are like, oh, that was hard. But every time you mentioned that, it was like this, like, you started to float a little bit, and it was awesome. So now this was your first time at GDC and speaking and things like that. So do you see a lucrative future now? You're going to become the Tony Robbins of game animation?
Definitely. I think that's more like you.
No. My hands aren't big enough?
No. No, man. I think you are the guy that kind of like brought everything together. By the way, this guy is amazing. Like, not only as an animator, but as a guy that kind of pulls people together. Like, we were at ZeniMax, and he was the guy that kind of like, okay, we need to get together and kind of like, he created all these different like events for us, and basically kind of brought the team together at ZeniMax, which was really cool. And seeing him do this here at this scale, it was pretty amazing.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
It's fun. Like, just getting to talk to you guys is what it's all about. What would you say has been maybe the most challenging thing that you've worked on in your career?
The fate shift in Reckoning. Like, so that's our special ability in Reckoning for the player. Like, basically you go into this fate shift mode, where basically you can different ways to destroy the creatures or other NPCs. That was the most challenging thing. Like, I think for us to kind of get the visual style, and like the visual style of it, and also not only the feel of it. I think, obviously games has to feel good on the button. That to me was like, we went back and forth. I did this one animation, and I probably want to say like it's about maybe a month and a half, maybe 2 months to kind of get it to just feel right. Yeah. It was a lot of back and forth. And like, I could see the other animators, like, as we're doing critiques with the designers and stuff, and like they can just see me like, oh my God, he's gonna redo it again. Yeah. So it was one of those things where, like, you have to redo it if it doesn't work. I mean, there's no other way to get around it. So
yeah. What are your favorite things to animate? Like, the things you look forward to either most on a project or things in the past?
By far, creatures, man. Any type of creature you throw at me, I would love it. Like, just something.
I was thinking, like a raccoon or something.
Shut up. Shut up. Raccoons are evil. Evil. Shut up. So back to creatures that I like animating, not raccoons. No, for me, like, I think I just love animating creatures. Just anything you throw at me that's just like out of the norm. I think the crazier the creature, the more I'll get into it. Just the fact that I would, because the more outrageous it is, the more I have to put myself in there and be more creative in solving this puzzle. Right? Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
I think with creatures, though, what I always like too is you can, like, you sit there and you try and reference, like, okay, what's some animal physiology that I can pull into to make it feel believable, but then you can sort of like take it to places, because it's like, I've never seen that creature before in real life, so if I want to make it fly, or if I decide that it hovers, or whatever spins around in place a bunch of times. Like, you can do it because who's to say you can't? And as long as you can sell the believability of it and the weight and all that, like, and that's great. That's kind of a freeing thing, right? After doing a bunch of bipedal pedestrians or humans or whatever.
Yeah, because you basically you define like the body mechanics of that creature because like it doesn't really exist, right? And like the fact that you're able to make something that believable that doesn't exist, and like people are buying into it, and you're like and they like, wow, that thing was vicious, and like in actuality that thing doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
You know, you just made that, and like the fact that people see it and actually believe it, it's just something amazing.
What in every game you've played, what do you think has been like a creature that's really stuck with you in a game?
Actually, currently, The Last Guardian,
Yeah,
that creature animation,
yeah, Trico's amazing.
ridiculous. Like, just, I mean, I loved. I mean, I would have loved to animate that creature. Just the fact that it's a main character.
Yeah.
And like basically, just the amount of things that he had to do and all stuff. It's just, oh man.
Yeah, you never get tired of, like, the personality is great, but those moments where you're like riding on the back and it's like
Yeah.
jumping, and every time it anticipates and it goes down, it's like, oh, it's gonna jump. Like, you feel that
Yeah,
sensation
yeah.
every time, which is like what we live for, right?
Yeah. And like even the subtleties of like the tilted head, I'm like, wow, he's thinking about doing that. Like, like little things like that.
Yeah.
I just eat that up, man. Like,
And even just on a technical level, like, can you imagine all the turn animations and all the orients and like all of those things that I know, like, it's you see that list of like, I need like turn 45 left, stop, turn 45, walk, like,
Yep.
would be, and especially on that scale of a character,
Yeah.
I can only imagine was just like
yep.
soul crushing at moments to create that, but it came together and made such a thing that was genius, and making it like have the personality of a cat or a dog that sometimes doesn't listen to you. It's genius on a design level.
Yes.
Because when there's just going to be issues that happen on something that scale of that interactivity,
Yeah.
but it blurs the line perfectly between is that its personality or is that just something weird in the system that isn't working? But it's genius, right? Like, I love that stuff.
Yeah. And even just like the fact that the way that he jumps around, even, I mean, for me, seeing him jump and then landing like, and like his back leg almost passes his front legs just to kind of catch the weight on that edge. Like,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is just crazy. And then he able to shift that weight. Oh man, it's so good.
Yeah, it's funny. We're now 3 for 3 with Ueda's games because it was Jeremy Yates had brought up Shadow of the Colossus as the game that sort of had that bit that stuck with him at the end of that, and then you bring up Ico, and we're talking about that. It's like his games just, I think, speak to animators. He comes from an animation background, but
Yep.
it's impossible because they are so character focused and physicality focused as well that it's
Yeah.
impossible not to fall in love.
Yeah, I mean, I think his animation in terms of just also body language, also I think to me was inspiring. Just like I'll talk about Ico a little bit more, like just the way like he was pulling her around, the princess around and stuff like that, and the way she kind of stops and kind of like was a little afraid, like just the body language of her like
Yeah.
stopping. The way she stopped is like so you could tell that she was a little afraid.
Yeah.
Unlike like there was definitely intention in every pose that she did, and to me that was awesome. And like continue to kind of like just have them play off each other, which is amazing. I mean, he's just good.
Yeah. No, so the next talk that we have coming up soon, they're getting it set up,
Right.
is Spider-Man 2, the movie game. This was one that I played in college and like stuck with me, the web swinging and the falling through the air and all that stuff. And this has been one of those games that's always stuck in my head, which is why I'm excited to do this flashback. But did you ever play Spider-Man 2, the movie
I
game?
did not get a chance to play.
Oh my gosh! You watch this because it's gonna be amazing. They're hooking it up on like an original Xbox right now, so technology is being a little interesting across a few generations here. But that was another one of those where it's kind of like those moments with Trico where you feel your stomach sort of like brace itself. As you're like spinning around, like I'm kind of watching now at the corner of my eye because they got it working on the TV and stuff. But it was another one of those where you're like flying through the air and you can feel that sensation like translating of like, oh, as I'm falling. Oh man, I love that sort of stuff.
So what was it about that game that kind of like, besides like the web slinging, like was there anything that else that kind of stood out to you?
For me, it's always been that fluidity of just that traversal, right? Like for me, open world games are because so much of it is getting from A to B, is getting there in a convincing way and making that unfrustrating and feel good, and that game did it really well. So. But Young, thank you for talking.
Awesome.
Thanks for watching, everyone. We will be doing. Don't forget, if you're enjoying the stream, if you hit the donate button, that donates to the IGDA Foundation, which has great things like the Scholars Program and helping women in games and all sorts of things like that are really great at strengthening the development community and people that will be joining it. So we're gonna wrap it up here and send it over to the guys on Spider-Man 2 Flashback, checking out what they've done. So thanks a lot.